Ladies and gentlemen, that's Lucas Bonoko, the craziest drummer in Joburg. I'd like to talk to you a bit today about death. Your death, my death, South Africa's death. We shared a moment as South Africa when Nelson Mandela died, shortly before we nearly all drowned in the mythological muck of the remembrance. There was that moment on the Friday morning when the clouds were really low and the radio came on and we realized that the man and his country had finally been parted. Love him or hate him, it was a poignant moment. So I wrote a poem about that. It's called Fly. The great bird flies, the nation cries, Obama clears his throat. Buzzards circle. White people play black people's songs. Black people sing. Houghton chants, Soweto chants, Boipatong chants, Makoma chants. Buzzards circle. Reporters, always the worst, drag and drag and drag the predictable hearse. People sing. The great bird flies, we watch the wings, brown and enormous, now nothing will hold us. We stand beneath and sing. Sing. So about a month before Mandela died, a friend of mine, Hloni, told me a story about how he was hanging around outside, around the corner from Arts on Main and Maboneng in the city, and he was rolling himself what they call a marijuana cigarette, a dacha joint. And this white guy popped up out of nowhere and said to him, please, 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 will you roll me one of those? Will you roll me one of those? I'll pay you, I'll pay you, I'll pay you. And so Hloni rolled the man a joint. But as he got to the end, where you have to lick the cigarette paper, the guy kind of leaned into him all worried and said, you're not going to lick that, are you? And then it all got really weird, because they had to try and conclude this deal without Hloni licking the joint. And for me, in my life, that story encapsulates where South Africa is at the time of Mandela's death. You know, on the one hand, it's quite remarkable that a white guy and a black guy will be sitting around in a dodgy corner of the city building joints on a Sunday afternoon. You know, if you look at Joburg and South Africa from the perspective of 20 years ago, that's quite remarkable. So we have achieved something. But on the other hand, that story encapsulates an emotion and a feeling that I hear more and more from the people I know who belong to the working class and the underclass, you know, the poorly employed and the unemployed. And the emotion goes something like this. We might be in danger in South Africa of becoming a country where the poor, where the development of the poor, where the liberal humanistic dictionary has effectively become the strategic currency of the elites, of people like us gathered here today, the politicians and the journalists and the NGO people, and of course the businessmen. And so, and you can see this kind of taking shape quite often in South Africa and in Johannesburg, you know, this idea that we have the dictionary, we've adopted the dictionary of liberal humanism and all that kind of stuff, and we talk about development and all that kind of stuff, and the photographs look really good on Facebook and Instagram and so forth, but there's this kind of feeling that from many people, that the protagonists of this development are fundamentally unwilling to share the spit of real life. You know, the rats in Alexander are of the same magnitude as they always have been. And so people get angry and people feel alienated, and there's this kind of frustration building amongst the working and underclass people of South Africa. And it's something I think that we need to take note of. And, you know, one of the ideas is that it's cold outside the ANC, you know, and we all know that it's cold outside the ANC. But I think that might be a bit of an error in interpretation, because my understanding is that there are many other systems of patronage and power and influence and so forth in operation in South Africa. So maybe at the time of Mandela's death, it's just cold, if you don't belong to one of these systems or another. You know. So for me personally, it was ironic that when one of our great South Africans died, there was so little reflection across the country about the meaning and the language of our existence. Because for me, I believe death has extraordinary powers on a logical level, on an ideological level, about the language and meaning of our life. So I have this relationship with death myself because I have a muscle disease, and so my body at the moment is about 95 years old in strength and mobility terms. You know, if I ever make it to 80 or 90, my body will be about 800 or 900 years old, you know. And so death and I have chatted along the way. And one of the most illuminating moments I had with death was I was in Cape Town at the Sports Science Centre on the exercise bike, and Gorvin and Becky was on the bike next to me. And so we were both about 87 years old at the time, you know. And it was a really strange experience because I can tell you now, I can warn you now that when you get to your late 80s and your early 90s, the exercise is getting onto the bike. To actually push the wheels around the bike, well, that is a challenge of a higher order. And what happens is you start to think, maybe I have lost this strength. Maybe I am unable to push these wheels around. Maybe I am dying. And so Gorvin and Becky and I were sharing the metaphysical sweat of death on that exercise bike, and I was struck at that time by the incredible realization that it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you've done, even a great man like Gorvin and Becky is forced to break this particular sweat. And when you break the sweat of death, things change. And so the facts of your life, the important things, the elements of your life fade into this kind of opaque background, and then you start to prioritize other things, like a good bowel movement. It becomes a priority. The ability to be able to get up and down of a toilet by yourself becomes a priority. It's not even a priority, it becomes a miracle. You start to think it's amazing that if people do this all around the world every day and we don't even notice, you know. And then you see a husband peck his wife on the cheek and you think, geez, I've been so lucky just to be alive, to be able to breathe in and out, to put one foot in front of the other. And then you see the blue sky out of your hospital bed and it makes you want to cry because you think you may not see that sky again. And of course, the whole thing's magnified by the fact that you're in hospital, you're in pain, and you're tanked up full of drugs, you know. And so the meaning of your life, the language of your life starts to take a whole new shape in this moment of death. So I wrote a poem about that, and it's called Thoughts from Hospital, and I wrote it for a nurse called Veronica. Pin in my hip, trying to shit, I realize life is like this. Pain, death, people dying in the clean winter night after night after night. But still, there is the song. Incredible that it washes over us and through us night after night. The twinkling, the tinkering, the work of people living, walking from here to you and back again. Come on, she says, little steps, knife through thigh, nurse hand on back. My wife smiles. Her hand is warm. I hang from it. It is real, like this night, like this life, like this song we all know, we think we dreamed about. So I'm intrigued by negativity, by the negative context. Is there a way of addressing negativity of one frame or another that one can systematize, that one can understand? And I think South Africa at the moment is in a fundamentally negative situation for all the reasons described here today. There's an enormous confluence of forces washing over us in South Africa. And one of the things I've noticed in my life about a fundamentally negative context is that we have a tendency as human beings to veer off into the moral. You know, this is a natural kind of instinctive reaction we have. And you see it taking shape in South Africa at the moment a lot in our political discourse, in our conversations, you know. So it's quite obvious that the DA's ideas are all wrong-headed, of course. But when you look at them, you can actually see that these people are genetic racists, you know. Or if you look at the ANC, and it's quite clear that they're failing to implement all of their policies and all of that kind of stuff. But when you look at the ANC guys, well, you can kind of see that they're kind of morally bereft, criminally corrupt individuals. You know. And this is I'm being sarcastic, but this is the tenor and the tone of much of our discourse at the moment in politics and in our civil society. And the weird and disturbing thing is that often it's actually the formal tone. You know, people aren't even burying it in the subtext. They're just putting it right out there. Our leadership, this is how people talk. So the problem I have with putting a moral frame around a negative context is that essentially what you end up doing is saying, we're not going to get out of this mess until that guy over there becomes a fundamentally better human being. You know? And in doing that, we're pushing ourselves up at this kind of dead end this kind of moral gunfight ensues where the protagonists don't seem to get injured, but where the crossfire is horrendous. And the crossfire is experienced by working average South Africans every day. But also in doing this, what we effectively do is we deny the last 30 years of science and research. Cognitive science shows us again and again in minute detail how hard it is for any individual or therefore any organization to perceive the flaws and errors in their own decision-making and thinking. It is scientifically much easier to see the flaws of logic in someone else's argument than it is to see your own. And yet in South Africa, what we seem to have on a political level is a whole bunch of hustlers developing their plans for rescuing the country like this, and not looking at or thinking about how important it is to listen. We will succeed far better in trying to execute our plans if we develop the ability to listen to other people, because other people have the ability to see what we can't in ourselves. You know? So this really interests me, the idea of morality and negativity, because if you have a muscle disease, you will know that people stop you. And I've been stopped since I was 3 years old, all the way up to this very day. And people tell you, where they wag a finger in your face, and they'll tell you that you've got some kind of moral worth or spiritual power or all this kind of stuff because you live the life that you do in the face of a car crash of a body, you know. And even motivational speakers, people who talk about these challenges and so forth, very often the narrative is framed within the context of personal spiritual growth and development and how you found either God or some kind of sort of a weird hippie solution to this thing. You know. And when I was younger, I really struggled with this because instinctively I just felt that it was rubbish. You know? Because in my life, every time I've tried to summon this power, every time I've tried to evoke the bravery or all this kind of stuff to get over the negativity, well, these are the moments where I have nearly died. I've nearly drowned and suffocated from the weight of this thing. You know. Conversely, what I've found has actually worked is, your body forces you, this negative context forces you to slow down fundamentally. And what you do, whether you're praying about it or not, is you start to explore all those cliche, generic, normative ideas about what it is to be alive, what it is to walk, what it is to be happy. All those kinds of things. When you're forced into this situation, you have to do some serious deep digging about these ideas. So is it possible for an upper middle class white guy in South Africa to have a happy upper middle class white guy life if you can't climb Table Mountain? If you can't swim in the sea, if you can't jog around the block, if you can't walk into a restaurant unaided, etc., etc., etc. Well, I can tell you that it is. But the problem is, or the challenge is that you're going to have to explore the very cliched, empty ideas that you've held previously in your life about what it is, for instance, to walk. So for me, I've had to make a decision. It's easier for me. I can walk 3 times further and 4 times faster when I'm barefoot. So, my life is much better. And I need to walk. If I don't walk, my body dies. So in theory, I shouldn't be wearing shoes here today. And Lucas was trying to encourage me to come barefoot. But of course, there's a complicated equation at play, because if I go to Investec barefoot, I'm not going to get the business. And so there's this huge equation that kind of runs through your head about walking, which is something that none of us really ever think about. My take is that it doesn't matter where that conversation ends in your head, because what you're effectively doing is you're applying language. You're recontextualizing the meaning of your life. You're kind of having a mini death in all these situations, and in those moments, you can dig deep into the meaning of your existence. And at the end of that, you end up living a life on the same happy and sad scale as anyone else on the planet. So then I think, in South Africa, is there a way we could fake our own death and get back to a Cadessa-like environment where we're not bargaining around who will hold the power, but where we're seeking as a collective group of individuals to explore the very detailed meaning of liberal humanistic verbiage, the kind of verbiage we currently chuck around like bullets, Well, I think probably not. I think we would need a kind of leadership of the order we just don't have at the moment to get us into that kind of situation where we could genuinely have that kind of conversation. But then I was thinking today, one thinks these things when you're preparing, why am I doing this? Why do I bother getting up here? Because I am fundamentally non-aligned. I'm not involved. I'm going to go home and watch TV tonight. So why? And the answer that comes pinging back to me from myself is, well, there might be politicians in the audience. And that feels weirdly compelling, And then I have to ask myself, well, why is that compelling? And then you think about it, the problem with being in the audience is you can't talk. And that's why you never find politicians in the audience, because they're obsessed with talking, with controlling the narrative, the stage, the camera, and so on and so on, And then the whole thing just ran away with me completely. And I thought, what would happen if we, on a legislative level in this country, instituted a 10-hour mandatory community listening minimum for every politician, business leader, union leader, and everyone else? What if we forced Helen Zille into the parks of this country in Zanin and Limpopo and East London and Bloemfontein, and we made her listen to what people are saying on Sunday afternoons? And what would happen if we muzzled her? If she wasn't allowed to tweet about it or do a press release or even talk in public about it, would that slow us down? Would that get us to that point where we could actually explore the meaning of the language we use? If we forced Jay-Z into trance parties on a Saturday night, if we lash juju to those trolleys that the guys whiz up and down Barry Herzog while they recycle our lives, maybe that would do it. And I know this is a metaphor, this is a myth, this is a dream, because there aren't any politicians in this planet who cannot talk for 10 hours a month. But I'd like to leave it with you as a potential strategic horizon for South Africa to fake our own death and get back to where we think we came from. So yeah, and then Stiley, when we were preparing for this, asked me to say something about the elections. And I don't think he really understood the enormity of the ask, because for me, personally in South Africa, I feel so distant from our leadership, from our politicians, from the people who are supposed to be taking us somewhere, that talking about something like the elections is almost impossible. All I can really do is describe the emotive distance I feel from the idea of leadership in South Africa. And so I wrote Stiley a poem, and I'd like to close with this poem for Stiley. And it seeks to represent my distance and also the distance of everyone I personally know. It's called Election Special, and it's about the drummers, the rappers and the poets, the DJs, the gogos and the grannies, the uncles and the aunts, and that guy on the bike.